Your brain isn't broken. It's just been taking very detailed notes on the wrong things. Here's what that looks like in practice. You get a performance review. 14 sentences. 13 of them are positive, specific, genuine, the kind of feedback people spend years hoping to receive. One sentence is a mild suggestion for improvement. Professionally phrased. Reasonable. The kind of thing a good manager says to someone they're investing in. You read it 3 times. You remember the one sentence. That night, lying in bed, you are not thinking about the 13. You are thinking about the one, turning it over, examining it from new angles, building a quiet, thorough case around it. By morning, it has become evidence. Evidence for something you already believed about yourself. Something the other 13 sentences were apparently insufficient to touch. This is not a story about insecurity. It's a story about a brain doing exactly what it was designed to do. Your brain is not malfunctioning when it does this. It is functioning perfectly. The problem is what it was designed for and what you're actually using it for are 2 completely different things. And nobody gave you the manual explaining the gap. I spent years believing I had an accurate read on my own life. Turns out I had a heavily edited version, curated by a system I didn't know was curating, filtered through assumptions I didn't know I was making, confirmed daily by evidence I didn't know I was selectively collecting. The picture felt like reality. It was a very convincing reconstruction of reality with most of the inconvenient parts removed. That reconstruction is running in everyone, including you. Right now, what this book is about is not positivity in the way that word usually arrives, wrapped in brightness, promising transformation, asking you to feel differently about things before you understand them. This is about something more specific and more useful than that. It's about the actual mechanics of how your mind builds the version of reality you live inside, and what becomes possible when you understand the construction process well enough to intervene in it, not override it, not bulldoze it with affirmations. Intervene, precisely, at the right moments, in the right ways, so that the version of reality your brain hands you starts to include more of what's actually there. The science behind this is real. The practices are specific. The results are not guaranteed, because nothing honest comes with a guarantee, but they are documented and available to anyone willing to look at their own mind with more curiosity than fear. That's the only prerequisite. Not optimism, not discipline, just curiosity, slightly more of it than you currently have about the machinery running quietly underneath everything you think, feel, and decide. You already have enough to start. Let's look at the machinery. Before we begin, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I read every single one. It's always interesting to see where this reaches. Chapter 1. The Confirmation Machine. A woman sits in a job interview. She's qualified. She's prepared. She's also already decided somewhere beneath conscious awareness that she's probably not going to get this job. So when the interviewer pauses to take a note, she reads it as disappointment. When he smiles, she reads it as politeness. When he says, "We'll be in touch," she hears finality. She walks out certain she failed. She got the job. She almost didn't accept it because she was so sure. This is not a story about self-confidence. It's a story about a brain doing exactly what it was designed to do, and doing it with terrifying efficiency. The technical term is confirmation bias. But that phrase is too clean, too academic for what it actually describes. What it actually describes is this. Your brain is not a camera. It's a prosecutor. It doesn't record what's in front of it. It builds a case, and it has already decided the verdict before the evidence comes in. Psychologists have studied this for decades. The findings are not encouraging. When people hold a belief about themselves, about others, about how the world works, they systematically seek information that confirms it, unconsciously discount information that contradicts it, and remember the confirming evidence longer. This isn't a flaw in certain kinds of people. It's a feature of all human cognition, including yours, including mine. The question worth sitting with isn't whether you do this. You do. The question is what verdict your brain has already reached, and whether you've ever actually examined it. Most people haven't. Not really. They've thought about their beliefs, certainly. Reviewed them, even. But reviewing a belief with the same mind that formed it is like asking the prosecutor to evaluate the case. The outcome is not unpredictable. Here's what makes this particularly interesting. The confirmation machine doesn't just operate on big, dramatic beliefs. I'm unlovable. I'll never succeed. The world is dangerous. It operates on the small ones, too. The ambient, background noise beliefs that run so quietly you've stopped hearing them. Beliefs like this is just how I am, or people like me don't get things like that, or it always works out this way. Those quiet ones are often the most powerful. Because they're never examined. They just hum along, filtering everything, coloring everything, and nobody ever thinks to check the filter. I had a belief for years that I was the kind of person who couldn't sustain things, couldn't maintain habits, routines, projects. I had evidence for this. I could list it easily. What I couldn't list, because I hadn't been tracking it, was everything I had sustained. The belief was real. The evidence was selective. So what do you do with a machine that's rigged? You don't smash it. It's not smashable. It's structural. What you do is become aware of the rigging. Specifically, you start asking a different question than the one your brain defaults to. The default question your brain asks is, where is the evidence that what I believe is true? The question that changes things is, what would I have to be wrong about for this to look different? That question is uncomfortable. It's supposed to be. Comfort is the confirmation machine's home turf. Discomfort is where actual perception begins. Here's a practical entry point. Pick one belief you hold about yourself. Not the biggest one, not the most charged one, just a medium-sized one. And spend 3 days looking for evidence against it. Not to prove it wrong. Just to see if the counter-evidence exists. Because if your brain has been filtering it out, you genuinely won't know it's there until you look. What most people discover when they do this is not that their negative beliefs were entirely false. It's that the picture was significantly more complicated than the version their brain had been showing them. And a complicated picture is much harder to be imprisoned by than a simple one. The confirmation machine runs on narrow inputs. The way you widen the input is attention, deliberate, directed, and slightly suspicious of your own first read on any situation. Your brain is very good at its job. The job you've accidentally assigned it may not be the one you actually want it doing. That's fixable. Not quickly, and not once, but fixable. The woman who almost didn't accept the job went on to lead the department. She still hears the interviewer's pause as disappointment sometimes. She's just learned not to file the verdict before the evidence is in. You can learn that too. Most people just never try. Chapter 2. The negativity bias isn't a bug. There is a part of your brain, ancient, tireless and completely indifferent to your happiness, that is scanning for threats approximately every few seconds. It was designed for an environment where the threats were physical, immediate, and often fatal. Lions, heights, other humans carrying weapons. You no longer live in that environment. Your brain has not received the update, so it scans anyway. And in the absence of actual predators, it finds what's available. The email that hasn't been answered, the comment that landed slightly wrong, the plan that could fail, the relationship that contains somewhere a possible rejection. It tags all of these as threats, assigns them emotional weight, and files them in a location that is significantly easier to access than the location where it files good news. This is called the negativity bias. And unlike most psychological concepts that sound dramatic and turn out to be modest, this one is exactly as significant as it sounds. Studies measuring brain activity show that negative stimuli produce more neural activity than equally intense positive ones. Negative events are processed more thoroughly, remembered more vividly, weighted more heavily in decision-making. Psychologists Roy Baumeister and colleagues reviewed the literature and reached a conclusion that is both scientifically precise and quietly devastating. Bad is stronger than good. Across nearly every domain of human psychology they examined, negative experiences outpunched positive ones of equivalent magnitude. Your brain is not giving negative and positive experiences equal airtime. It is running a heavily tilted broadcast, and it has been doing this your entire life, and you have experienced it as simply the way things are. A colleague of mine spent 3 years convinced his career was stalling. He had been passed over for one promotion. He had also, in that same period, received 2 significant commendations, taken on more responsibility than anyone else at his level, and been described by his manager as the most reliable person on the team. He knew all of this. He could recite it. But the promotion he didn't get sat in his chest like a stone, and the rest of it sat somewhere he couldn't quite feel. That's not weakness. That's neuroscience. The stone was always going to be heavier. Understanding this doesn't dissolve the bias, but it does change your relationship to it. When the negative thing looms larger than its actual size, and it always will, you can recognize that as a feature of the hardware, not an accurate reading of the situation. The reading is distorted, not because you're pessimistic, because you're human. The practical implication of this is specific and slightly counterintuitive. Because negative experiences are processed more deeply, positive experiences require more repetition to achieve equivalent weight. You cannot simply have a good thing happen and expect it to balance a bad thing of similar size. The scales are not level, which means if you want to maintain any kind of equilibrium, not forced positivity, just a reasonably accurate picture of your life, you have to be more intentional about registering positive experiences than you would ever naturally think necessary. Neuroscientist Rick Hansen describes this as taking in the good, the deliberate practice of holding a positive experience in awareness for at least 20 to 30 seconds, allowing it time to actually encode rather than slide off. It sounds almost embarrassingly simple. It works because of basic neurological mechanics, not because of any mystical property of gratitude. Your brain forms stronger memories of things it dwells on. You have been unconsciously dwelling on the negative your whole life. The corrective is not to dwell on the positive with equal intensity. That would tip the scales the other way and produce a different kind of distortion. The corrective is to simply stop letting good things pass through unregistered while bad things get the full processing treatment. I still catch myself doing it. Something genuinely good happens, and I move on in about 4 seconds. Something mildly uncomfortable happens, and I'm apparently still thinking about it on a Tuesday 6 weeks later. The disproportion is absurd when you notice it. Most of the time, I don't notice it. That's the bias doing its job. The negativity bias also explains something that confuses a lot of people about their own motivation. Why is it so much easier to be driven by fear of loss than by hope of gain? Why does a possible negative outcome feel more urgent than an equally possible positive one? Because your brain is not trying to maximize your happiness. It is trying to keep you alive. In the ancestral environment, missing a gain was a setback. Missing a threat was death. The math was clear. Your brain is still running that math in a world where the math no longer applies. None of this means you are doomed to be a negativity processing machine with occasional flickers of appreciation. It means you are working with a system that has a strong default, and defaults can be interrupted. Not eliminated, interrupted. Regularly, deliberately, without expecting the interruption to feel natural, because it won't. Because nothing that runs against a deep default ever does. The bias is ancient. Your awareness of it is new. That asymmetry is actually in your favor, because the bias operates automatically, but awareness operates intentionally, and intention, applied consistently, can redirect even very old systems. Your brain was built for a world with tigers. You live in a world with email. The gap between those two realities is where most of your unnecessary suffering lives. Knowing that doesn't make the suffering disappear, but it does make it slightly harder to take completely seriously. You're still here. 2 chapters in, that's not nothing. Most people who clicked this video moved on before they got uncomfortable. You didn't. Which means something in here is hitting close enough to stay. If that's the case, subscribe. Not because this channel needs it, because the next time you want this kind of thinking, you'll want to find it without looking for it. That's all. Back to the part that actually matters. Chapter 3. The stories you didn't know you were writing. Somewhere around age 8 or 9, a child decides something about themselves. Maybe it happens after a teacher's offhand comment. Maybe it's the moment they realized they were the last one picked, or the first one laughed at, or the only one in the room who didn't understand something everyone else seemed to find obvious. The decision isn't dramatic. It doesn't feel like a decision at all. It feels like a discovery, and then they spend the next 40 years living inside it. The story you tell yourself about who you are is not a neutral document. It's an active filter, one that determines what you notice, what you attempt, what you assume, and what you quietly decide isn't for people like you. Most people treat this story as autobiography. It's actually closer to fiction. Specifically, it's the kind of fiction that gets mistaken for fact, because it's been read so many times the spine is broken and the pages have gone soft. Narrative psychology, the study of how humans use stories to construct identity, has produced findings that are equal parts fascinating and unsettling. People don't just tell stories about their lives. They live inside those stories. The narrative becomes the lens, and the lens determines what counts as evidence, what gets remembered, and what gets quietly edited out before it even reaches conscious awareness. Jerome Bruner, one of the founding figures of narrative psychology, argued that humans are not primarily rational animals. We are storytelling animals. We don't experience events and then decide what they mean. We fit events into existing stories and experience them through that frame. This is efficient. It's also, depending on the story you're running, quietly catastrophic. Here's the part that tends to land hard. The story doesn't have to be negative to be limiting. Some people are running hero narratives that are just as constraining as victim narratives. Because the hero story requires constant evidence of heroism, and anything that doesn't fit gets filed as a temporary setback, rather than information worth examining. The story protects itself. That's what stories do. I watched a man I know restructure an entire friendship around a story he'd decided was true. That he was the kind of person who gave more than he received. Every interaction got filtered through that frame. When the friend gave generously, he didn't register it. When the friend had an off week and needed more than he could offer, it became evidence. The story wasn't wrong exactly, but it wasn't the whole picture either. He just couldn't see the rest of it, because the story had already decided what the picture contained. The first move in changing a narrative isn't rewriting it. That comes later. The first move is recognizing that you have one. That the running commentary in your head about who you are and what your life means is not objective reporting. It is a draft. A draft written largely by a child, revised occasionally by stress and crisis, and almost never examined with the critical distance you'd bring to anything else you'd been handed and told was true. What does your story say about you? Not the version you'd tell at a dinner party, the version that runs underneath, the one that explains why certain things feel possible and others don't, why certain compliments slide off and certain criticisms stick, why you keep finding yourself in variations of the same situation, wondering how you got here again. That story has a logic to it. And the logic made sense once, probably. Most stories do at the beginning. The question is whether the story you started writing at 9 is the one that should be determining your options at 35 or 45 or 60. Whether the original author, a child with limited data and enormous emotional stakes, should still be the one holding the pen. Rewriting a narrative is not the same as lying to yourself. It's not replacing a dark story with a bright one and hoping the brightness sticks. It's something more precise and more difficult. It's locating the moments your existing story conveniently skipped, the chapters it glossed over, the evidence it filed in the wrong drawer. It's asking whether the story is actually complete, or whether it's a highlights reel of the worst moments with the rest on the cutting room floor. Most people's self-narratives are missing enormous amounts of data. Not because they're stupid or unobservant, because the brain, as we've already established, is not a camera. It's an editor. And editors cut what doesn't serve the story they're trying to tell. Start with a single question. Not a dramatic one. Just this. What has happened in your life that your current story about yourself cannot easily explain? What evidence exists that doesn't fit the narrative? Not evidence that the narrative is wrong, just evidence that the picture might be more complicated than the version you've been carrying. Sit with that for a while before you do anything else. The goal isn't to feel better immediately. The goal is to create enough cognitive space that the story stops feeling like reality and starts feeling like what it actually is. A document written under pressure by someone who was doing the best they could with what they had. That someone was you. They deserve some editorial mercy. The story isn't finished. It was never finished. The uncomfortable thing about that is also the only thing about it worth holding on to. You're still writing it. Most people just forgot they were holding the pen. Chapter 4. What other people are actually doing to your brain. A man starts a new job. He's sharp, motivated, genuinely excited. Within 8 months, he's become someone his previous colleagues wouldn't quite recognize. Slightly more cynical, quicker to assume bad intent, slower to volunteer, faster to protect himself. Nothing dramatic happened. No single event explains it. He just spent 8 months breathing the same air as people who experienced the world a particular way. And then he became someone who experienced the world that way too. This is not a metaphor. This is neuroscience. The human brain contains mirror neurons, cells that fire not only when you perform an action, but when you observe someone else performing it. This system was designed for learning and empathy. It is also, in ways researchers are still mapping, the mechanism by which other people's emotional states become your emotional states, without either party noticing the transfer. You don't decide to absorb the anxiety of an anxious person. You just do. The absorption is automatic, below the threshold of awareness, and cumulative over time. Your social environment is not backdrop, it's input. And your brain is processing that input continuously, adjusting its baselines, recalibrating what feels normal, reshaping what feels possible. The people you spend the most time with are not just company. They are, in a very literal neurological sense, slowly rewriting your defaults. Psychologist Nicholas Christakis spent years mapping how behaviors, moods, and even health outcomes spread through social networks. His findings were uncomfortable enough that they generated significant academic pushback, not because the data was weak, but because the implications were. Happiness, he found, is contagious across 3 degrees of separation. So is depression. So is obesity. So is loneliness. The people your friends know, people you may have never met, are having measurable effects on your life. Most people, when they hear this, think about the obvious candidates. The chronically negative friend, the colleague who treats every meeting like a grievance session, the family member who has elevated complaint to an art form. And yes, those people are doing something to your brain. But the subtler cases are more interesting and more dangerous, because the obvious ones you at least know to brace for. The subtle cases are the people who are perfectly pleasant, perfectly well-meaning, and operating from a set of assumptions about what's possible that quietly set a ceiling on yours. The people who have decided, without ever quite saying it, that certain things are for certain kinds of people, and you are not quite that kind. The people whose love is genuine, and whose limitations are invisible, and whose worldview you have been absorbing since before you had the cognitive equipment to evaluate it. Those are harder to account for. Because the input doesn't feel like input, it feels like reality. I spent 3 years in a professional environment where low expectations were so normalized that ambition read as naivety. I watched myself adjust, started preemptively shrinking proposals, started framing ideas apologetically before anyone had even responded to them. Thought I was being realistic. I was being marinated. The inverse is equally true and significantly more useful. Research on high-performing teams consistently finds that individual performance is not just a function of individual ability. It's a function of the social environment in which that ability is being expressed. People think more creatively, take more productive risks, and recover from setbacks faster when they're embedded in groups that expect those things of them. The expectation itself functions as a kind of scaffolding. You perform into the space the environment creates. This is why the advice to choose your company carefully is not motivational poster wisdom. It's applied neuroscience. The people around you are setting the parameters of your cognitive and emotional operating range, not by telling you what to do, but by demonstrating, repeatedly and implicitly, what is normal, what is possible, and what kind of person you apparently are. So what do you do with this? The answer is not to audit your relationships with a clipboard and start cutting people. That's both socially catastrophic and slightly sociopathic. The answer is more nuanced and more actionable. First, notice. Pay attention to how you feel during and after extended time with specific people. Not in a paranoid way, just with the same curiosity you'd apply to any other variable that was affecting your system. Do you leave certain conversations feeling expanded or contracted? More capable or less? More like yourself or like a slightly diminished version of yourself? The data is available. Most people just never collect it. Second, be intentional about exposure. You may not be able to eliminate contact with people who reliably make you smaller, but you can modulate it, and you can deliberately increase contact with people who do the opposite, not because they're relentlessly positive, but because they're operating from assumptions about the world and about you that create room rather than reduce it. Third, recognize that you are doing this to other people too. Your presence is an environment. Your assumptions about what's possible are broadcasting constantly. The people around you are absorbing your defaults the same way you're absorbing theirs. This is either a sobering responsibility or a remarkable opportunity, depending on what you decide to do with it. The man from the beginning of this chapter eventually left that job. It took another year before he felt fully like himself again. He described it once as depressurizing, like his original personality had been compressed and needed time to re-expand. He hadn't lost himself. He'd just been in an environment that made him smaller than he was. Environments do that. They also do the opposite. The question is, which one you're currently living in, and whether you've ever actually decided that deliberately, or just ended up there. Chapter 5. Gratitude is not a feeling. It's a practice you're probably doing wrong. A woman sits down each evening with a notebook. She has been doing this for 4 months, writing 3 things she's grateful for before bed, exactly as instructed by approximately every wellness resource she has ever encountered. She is doing it correctly. She is also getting almost nothing from it. The entries have started to look like this: family, health, good weather; family, health, coffee; family, health, the fact that it's Friday. She is not ungrateful. She is bored. And boredom, in a gratitude practice, is a sign of a very specific problem. She's been cataloging outcomes, and outcomes, however good, are not where gratitude actually lives. The research on gratitude is genuinely robust, not in the self-help sense of studies suggest, but in the replication across multiple cultures, measurable neurological effects sense. People who practice gratitude consistently show lower cortisol levels, higher reported life satisfaction, better sleep, stronger immune function, and improved relationship quality. The effect sizes are not trivial. This is not a placebo. Something real is happening. But the mechanism matters. And the mechanism is not feeling thankful for good things. The mechanism is attention. Specifically, the redirection of attention toward aspects of experience that were always present, but chronically unregistered. Gratitude works because it trains the brain to notice, not to feel, to notice, which means the failure mode is exactly what the woman with the notebook is experiencing. When gratitude becomes a list of outcomes, the big things, the obvious things, the things you'd put on a highlights reel, it stops training attention and starts functioning as a mildly pleasant recap. The brain habituates to it within weeks. The emotional response flattens. The practice continues, but the mechanism has quietly stopped working. The fix is specificity. Not vague gratitude for family. Gratitude for the specific moment your sister laughed so hard she couldn't finish her sentence. Not gratitude for health. Gratitude for the particular sensation of walking outside this morning when the air was cold enough to feel like something. Not gratitude for coffee. Well, actually, gratitude for coffee might be fine if you really mean it. Specificity matters because the brain responds to novelty. A new, concrete detail activates attention in a way that a repeated abstraction does not. When you force yourself to identify something specific, something particular to today, not recyclable into tomorrow, you are doing the actual work of the practice. You are training your perceptual system to find texture in experience it would otherwise smooth over. Psychologist Martin Seligman, whose work on positive psychology is among the most cited in the field, found that one of the highest impact gratitude exercises is not journaling at all, it's a letter. Specifically, writing a detailed letter of gratitude to someone who made a meaningful difference in your life, and then reading it to them in person. The effect on both parties is significant, measurable, and surprisingly durable. Not because gratitude is expressed, but because the act of composing the letter forces the kind of specific, detailed attention that makes the practice neurologically effective. Most people never do this. It feels too exposed, too earnest. The irony is that the things that feel too earnest are usually the things that actually work. I kept a gratitude journal for 6 weeks in a way that I now recognize as completely useless. I was going through the motions, producing entries that looked like gratitude and functioned like nothing. The entries were technically accurate and experientially inert. I was grateful in the same way a person is technically exercising when they walk very slowly to their car. There's another failure mode worth naming, because it's subtler and more common than the notebook problem. It's gratitude deployed as suppression, using appreciation for what you have to avoid feeling what you actually feel. This version sounds like I shouldn't complain. Others have it worse, which is true, technically, and also completely beside the point. Gratitude that functions as self-silencing is not a practice. It's a pressure valve, and it does approximately nothing for the neurological mechanisms that make genuine gratitude effective. Real gratitude doesn't require you to stop feeling the hard things. It runs alongside them. The capacity to notice what's genuinely good in your life, specifically and concretely, while also holding what's difficult, that's the actual skill. It's harder than making a list. It's also the version that does something. There's a quality of attention that underlies all of this that's worth naming directly. It's the capacity to be genuinely struck by ordinary things, to find a specific Tuesday afternoon, the light at a particular angle, the conversation that went somewhere unexpected, the meal that was better than it needed to be. Actually worth registering. Not performed appreciation, real noticing. Most people move through the texture of their lives at a speed that makes texture impossible to experience. Gratitude, practiced specifically and honestly, is one of the few things that slows that down. Not because slowing down is inherently virtuous, because your life is actually happening in the specific moments, not in the category of moments you'll later summarize as the good years or a hard period or when things were simpler. The woman with the notebook eventually changed her approach. Started writing one thing instead of 3, but one thing that was detailed enough that she couldn't have written it yesterday. It took longer. The entries were stranger. They were also, for the first time, actually hers. Gratitude is not a feeling you wait to have. It's a direction you train your attention to move. Most people are waiting. The waiting is the problem. Chapter 6. Presence is a skill, and most people have exactly zero of it. A man is having dinner with his wife. She is telling him something that matters to her. Not a crisis, just something that happened, something she's been turning over in her mind. He is nodding. He is making appropriate sounds. He is also, simultaneously, composing a response to an email he didn't send this afternoon, running a background calculation on whether he remembered to lock the car, and experiencing a low-grade anxiety about a conversation he needs to have tomorrow that he has been not thinking about for 3 days. His wife finishes. He says that sounds really hard. It's the right thing to say. He has no idea what she actually said. This is not a story about a bad husband. This is a story about a default human condition that almost nobody talks about honestly. Harvard psychologists Matthew Killingsworth and Daniel Gilbert spent years developing an experience sampling app that contacted participants at random moments throughout the day and asked 2 questions. What are you doing right now? And are you thinking about what you're doing? The results were published in Science and have been quietly disturbing researchers ever since. People's minds were wandering away from whatever they were actually doing, 47% of the time. Nearly half of waking life spent somewhere other than where the body was. And the kicker, the finding that makes this more than just an interesting statistic. A wandering mind was a less happy mind. Not because the content of the wandering thoughts was necessarily negative, because presence itself, contact with the actual moment, correlates with well-being in ways that thinking about pleasant things does not. Being somewhere pleasant in your imagination is measurably less satisfying than being somewhere ordinary in reality. This finding cuts against a significant amount of intuition. Most people experience mind wandering as neutral at worst, a harmless drift, a mental screensaver. The data suggests it's costing something real. Presence is not a spiritual concept dressed up in scientific language. It's a cognitive state with measurable properties. And like any cognitive state, it can be trained, degraded, and recovered. Most people, through no particular fault of their own, have been systematically degrading it for years. The mechanisms are familiar. Constant connectivity, fragmented attention, the neurological conditioning of an environment that rewards rapid switching and punishes sustained focus. The result is a population that is physically present in their lives and cognitively somewhere else most of the time. Not dramatically, just persistently. Just enough to create the quiet, sourceless sense that life is passing slightly faster than it should, that conversations are less connecting than they used to be, that even enjoyable experiences have a faint film of distance over them. That film is absence, and it accumulates. Mindfulness, the practice of deliberately returning attention to present moment experience, has been studied extensively enough that the research has moved well past the early enthusiasm phase and into something more reliable. The benefits are real but specific. Mindfulness does not produce euphoria. It does not eliminate negative emotion. What it does, with consistent practice, is increase the gap between stimulus and response, the space in which you can notice what's happening before you react to it. That gap is small. It is also, functionally, everything. The man at the dinner table has no gap. The email, the car, the conversation, they've colonized the space where his wife is trying to reach him. He's not ignoring her. He's just not there. And the difference between those two things, from her perspective, is not as large as he would hope. I have sat in conversations with people I care about and been so thoroughly elsewhere that I later could not reconstruct what was discussed. Not because I was distracted by anything important, just because presence is a resource I wasn't managing, and it ran out quietly, without announcement, somewhere in the middle of a sentence. The entry point to developing presence is not meditation, though meditation is useful. The entry point is simpler and more immediately available. Single tasking. Doing one thing and only one thing for a defined period of time. Not as a productivity strategy, as a practice of contact. Contact with the task, the person, the meal, the walk. Contact with the actual texture of the moment rather than the mental commentary running over it. This is harder than it sounds. The mind will migrate. That's not failure. That's the nature of the system. The practice is not staying present. The practice is noticing when you've left and coming back. Noticing and returning. Noticing and returning. The repetition of that movement is what builds the capacity over time. What's worth understanding is why this matters beyond the obvious. The argument for presence is not just that it makes you calmer or more connected or better at dinner conversations. It's that experience only exists in the present moment. The past exists as memory, which is reconstructed, selective, and demonstrably unreliable. The future exists as projection, which is speculative, anxiety-prone, and also demonstrably unreliable. The only place anything actually happens is now. And if you're spending 47% of your time somewhere else, you are missing 47% of your life. Not metaphorically, literally. The moments are occurring, and you are not in them. The man eventually put his phone in another room during dinner. Not because his wife asked him to, though she had twice, but because he read the Killingsworth and Gilbert study and did a rough, uncomfortable calculation of how many dinners he had technically attended without actually being there. The number was large enough that he didn't finish the calculation. He put the phone in the other room. His wife said something. He heard it. It turned out to be a better use of the evening than the email would have been. Chapter 7. The Helper's High and What It Reveals About You. A woman volunteers at a food bank every third Saturday. She has been doing this for 2 years. If you ask her why, she will tell you it's because she wants to give back, because she believes in community, because it feels like the right thing to do. All of this is true. What she doesn't mention, what she may not have fully articulated even to herself, is that those Saturday mornings are the part of her week where she feels most like herself, most competent, most connected, most unambiguously useful in a life that otherwise contains a significant amount of ambiguity. She is not being dishonest about her motivations. She just hasn't looked at them closely enough to see all of them. This is not a criticism. It's an invitation. When you do something genuinely good for another person, your brain releases a cocktail of neurochemicals: dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, that produces what researchers have termed the helper's high. This is documented, replicable, and physiologically real. The warm feeling you get from helping someone is not a side effect of virtue. It is a neurological event. Your brain is rewarding the behavior the same way it rewards eating, connection, and accomplishment, which raises a question that most conversations about giving carefully avoid. If helping makes you feel good, who exactly is it for? The honest answer is both. And the honest answer matters because understanding your actual motivations, not the story you tell about your motivations, but the real architecture underneath is the only way to make sure your giving is actually doing what you think it's doing. Some helping is genuinely other-focused. It responds to what the other person needs, adapts when that changes, and doesn't require particular gratitude or acknowledgement to sustain itself. Some helping is more self-focused than it appears. It needs the recipient to receive in a specific way, becomes subtly resentful when it isn't acknowledged, and has a tendency to help people in the ways the helper finds meaningful, rather than the ways the recipient actually needs. These are not morally equivalent, even though both feel like generosity from the inside. The research on pro-social behavior, giving, volunteering, acts of kindness, is consistently positive about its effects on well-being. People who give regularly report higher life satisfaction, lower rates of depression, stronger sense of purpose, and better physical health outcomes than people who don't. The effect is robust enough that some researchers have argued giving should be considered a basic well-being practice alongside exercise and sleep. But the quality of that giving matters. Studies comparing different forms of pro-social behavior find that giving which is chosen freely, connected to personal values, and involves genuine contact with the recipient produces stronger well-being effects than giving that is obligatory, disconnected from values, or abstract. Writing a check to a cause you feel vaguely guilty about not supporting does not produce the same neurological response as spending an afternoon with someone whose situation you actually understand. Contact is the variable. The helper's high is strongest when you can see what your contribution does. I once spent a significant amount of time giving in ways that were more about managing my own discomfort than actually helping anyone. Someone was struggling. I felt the discomfort of watching it, and I gave advice, quickly, thoroughly, with total confidence. Because fixing the situation was the fastest way to stop feeling the discomfort of witnessing it. I called this helping. It was mostly just discomfort management with extra steps. The person rarely needed what I was offering. They usually just needed someone to stay in the room with the difficulty a little longer without rushing to resolve it. Staying in the room without rushing to resolve it is considerably harder than giving advice. It's also, in many cases, considerably more useful. There's a related pattern worth examining. Some people give constantly and feel increasingly depleted rather than sustained. This is a sign that the giving has become disconnected from genuine choice. It's operating from obligation, from fear of what happens if they stop, from an identity so thoroughly built around being useful to others that any moment of not helping feels like a kind of disappearance. This is not generosity. This is a coping mechanism that has learned to dress well. Genuine generosity has a quality of surplus to it. You give from something that is actually replenishing. When giving consistently drains rather than sustains, the first question worth asking is not how do I give more sustainably, but why have I built a life where my worth feels contingent on constant output? That question is harder. It also tends to be more useful. The woman at the food bank, when she eventually looked at her motivations honestly, found exactly what you'd expect: a mixture of genuine care and genuine self-interest, woven together in ways that couldn't be cleanly separated. The caring was real. The need to feel useful was also real. The Saturday mornings were serving both, simultaneously, without contradiction. That's not a compromise. That's how humans actually work. The mistake is insisting that genuine generosity must be purely selfless, because purely selfless motivation is essentially non-existent in human psychology. And requiring it as the standard for real giving means most real giving gets quietly disqualified before it happens. You help because it matters to you. The it includes other people, It also includes what helping does to and for you. Both parts are true. Neither part makes the help less real. What you choose to help with, though, that part is worth examining carefully. Because the causes that pull you, the people whose situations you find yourself unable to walk past, the kinds of need that activate you while others leave you unmoved, that pattern is a map of something. Values, yes, but also history. Also need. Also the particular shape of your own unresolved things. You don't have to have perfectly clean motivations to do genuinely good things. You just have to be honest enough with yourself to know the difference between helping someone and helping yourself while someone else is in the room. The woman is still at the food bank every third Saturday. She's just a little clearer now about why. It hasn't made her less committed. If anything, it's made her more reliable, because she's not pretending the benefit runs in only one direction. Honesty about motivation tends to do that. It makes the thing sustainable, because it's real. Chapter 8. The mind doesn't know the difference between a memory and a movie. A pianist is preparing for a performance. She has 2 weeks. For the first week, she practices physically. Hands on keys, hours at the instrument. The ordinary grueling work of preparation. For the second week, an injury to her hand makes physical practice impossible. So she practices mentally. She sits in a chair, eyes closed, and plays the entire piece in her mind. Every note, every transition, every dynamic shift, with complete internal precision. She performs. She performs well. This is not an anecdote about the power of the human spirit. This is a report on a neurological property that researchers have been documenting for decades, and most people have never meaningfully applied to their own lives. When you vividly imagine performing an action, your brain activates many of the same neural pathways as when you actually perform it. Motor cortex activity during detailed mental rehearsal is measurably similar to motor cortex activity during physical execution. The brain, at the level of neural firing patterns, does not cleanly distinguish between a vividly imagined experience and a real one. This is why nightmares produce genuine fear responses, why replaying an embarrassing moment produces genuine shame, why imagining a confrontation produces genuine cortisol. Your imagination is not a passive entertainment system. It's a rehearsal space. And whatever you rehearse in it, you are preparing your brain to execute. Most people are using this system accidentally and badly. The default human imagination, left unsupervised, has a strong preference for disaster rehearsal. The conversation that could go wrong, the presentation that might fail, the relationship that could fall apart in this specific way, or that specific way, or several simultaneously. The brain runs these scenarios with genuine production values, detailed, vivid, emotionally real, and then files the physiological responses as experience. You have practiced failing at things you have never attempted. You have practiced being rejected by people who haven't rejected you. You have practiced versions of your future that exist nowhere, except in a rehearsal space you didn't know you were running. And then you wonder why certain things feel preloaded with dread before they've had a chance to actually happen. The visualization research began seriously with athletes. Soviet sports scientists in the 1970s and 80s were early and rigorous investigators. Their findings on mental rehearsal contributed to training programs that produced results Western coaches initially attributed to doping rather than psychology. The subsequent decades of research in sports psychology, neuroscience, and clinical practice have produced a body of evidence substantial enough that mental rehearsal is now standard in elite athletic preparation across virtually every discipline. What migrated more slowly was the application outside sports. Because the same mechanism that helps a diver prepare for a complex dive also helps a person prepare for a difficult conversation, or a job interview, or a medical procedure, or any high-stakes situation where the brain's preloaded response will significantly affect the actual outcome. The technique is specific. Vague positive thinking, imagining a good outcome in abstract terms, produces weak effects. What produces strong effects is detailed, sensory, process-focused visualization. Not just imagining the outcome, but imagining the experience of getting there. What you see, hear, and feel. What the environment looks like. What your body is doing. What you do when something goes slightly wrong. Because in the rehearsal, you should practice navigating difficulty, not just imagining everything going perfectly. Perfect outcome visualization is actually less effective than process visualization that includes obstacles. Because the brain is rehearsing execution, and execution always involves adaptation. A rehearsal with no problems produces a performer with no practiced response to problems. I ran disaster rehearsals for years without naming them as such. Called it preparing. Called it being realistic. Called it not getting my hopes up. What I was actually doing was practicing in high neurological fidelity experiences I was afraid of having, which meant that when similar situations arose in reality, my brain had already logged significant hours in the failure scenario. The dread wasn't irrational. It was the output of a rehearsal process I'd been running, diligently and unconsciously, for a very long time. The correction is not to stop imagining difficulty. It's to change the role you play in the scenario. In disaster rehearsal, you are passive. Things happen to you. In useful mental rehearsal, you are active. You are the one navigating, responding, adapting, continuing. The difference in neurological effect is significant. One trains helplessness. The other trains agency. There's a related mechanism worth understanding. The brain's emotional response to imagined negative futures is not just unpleasant, it's depleting. Anxiety, at its neurological core, is often the output of a threat detection system that has been handed a screenplay instead of a reality and is responding as though the screenplay is happening now. The cortisol is real even when the threat is fictional. The exhaustion is real even when nothing has actually occurred. This is why people can feel genuinely tired from worrying. Not metaphorically tired. Physiologically tired, from running stress responses to events that exist only in the rehearsal space. The practical implication is twofold. First, notice what your imagination is rehearsing, not to suppress it, but to make the process conscious enough to interrupt. Second, deliberately introduce alternative rehearsals, not naive ones. The goal is not to convince yourself that nothing will go wrong. The goal is to give your brain a practiced response to difficulty that involves continuing rather than collapsing. Visualization works. The question is what you're visualizing, how specifically you're doing it, and whether you're doing it on purpose or just letting the rehearsal space run whatever it wants to run. Most people are letting it run. It has been running disaster rehearsals with their full unconscious cooperation for years. The pianist with the injured hand understood something that most people don't. That preparation happens in the mind as well as in the hands, and that the mind, given precise and repeated instruction, will do the work. She gave her imagination a specific assignment, and it delivered. You have the same rehearsal space. You have been leaving it unsupervised. It has been busy. Chapter 9, change doesn't feel like growth. It feels like loss. A man gets the promotion he has wanted for 3 years. New title, new salary, new office on a different floor with people he doesn't know yet. He expected to feel triumphant. He feels instead a low-grade wrongness that he cannot name and is slightly ashamed to admit. The old job wasn't even that good. He wanted out of it. And yet leaving it feels like something is being taken rather than given. He doesn't tell anyone this. It doesn't seem like the kind of thing you say when you've just gotten what you wanted. But the feeling is real, and it has a name, and understanding it changes everything about how you navigate any significant transition in your life. Your brain has a deeply conservative streak, not politically, neurologically. It is wired to treat the familiar as safe and the unfamiliar as a potential threat, regardless of whether the familiar thing was actually good and the unfamiliar thing is objectively better. This is not a character flaw. It is the output of a system designed to keep you alive in an environment where novelty frequently meant danger. The problem, as with most of the brain's ancestral programming, is that the environment changed and the programming didn't. Neuroscientist and psychiatrist Bruce Perry has written extensively on how the brain responds to disruption of established patterns, what he calls the neurosequential response to change. The stress response your nervous system produces when your routine is disrupted is not proportional to the actual threat level of the disruption. It's proportional to the degree of unfamiliarity. Your brain cannot tell the difference between this is unfamiliar because it's dangerous and this is unfamiliar because it's new. It flags both the same way, which means that growth, real growth, the kind that involves actually changing rather than just thinking about changing, will almost always feel wrong at first. Not difficult. Wrong. Like a violation of something. Like loss. Carol Dweck's research on growth mindset has been discussed so extensively in the last decade that it has become something of a cliché, which is a shame, because the underlying finding is genuinely useful and regularly misapplied. The finding is not that telling yourself you can grow will make you grow. The finding is that the belief that your capacities are expandable changes how you respond to difficulty in ways that are behaviorally measurable. People with a growth orientation interpret struggle as evidence that they are learning. People with a fixed orientation interpret the same struggle as evidence that they've reached their limit. Same struggle. Completely different neurological and behavioral response. What Dweck's work doesn't always emphasize, but what the broader literature on change makes clear, is that even people with genuine growth orientation still feel the discomfort of transition. The growth mindset doesn't eliminate the wrongness feeling. It just changes what you do with it. Instead of reading the discomfort as a signal to retreat, you read it as a signal that something unfamiliar is being integrated. Same feeling, different interpretation, different outcome. A woman I knew left a 15-year marriage. The marriage had been, by any honest accounting, a diminishing experience, slowly contracting, slowly removing her from herself, slowly making her less than she'd been when it started. She left, and then spent 8 months mourning it with an intensity that confused everyone around her, including herself. She wasn't mourning the marriage. She was mourning the familiar, the known shape of her days, the specific texture of a life that had been hers, even when it hadn't been good. The self that had existed inside that structure, even a smaller self, felt more real than the self she was trying to become, because the new self hadn't accumulated any memories yet. This is what nobody tells you about positive change. The new thing, however objectively better, starts with no history. The old thing, however objectively worse, has years of accumulated familiarity, and familiarity to the brain registers as safety. The brain will fight for safety even when safety is the thing that's been slowly diminishing you. So the transition looks, from the inside, like grief, because it is grief, not for something good, for something known. The mistake is interpreting that grief as information about the decision, as evidence that you made the wrong move, chose the wrong path, should go back. The grief is not information about the decision. The grief is information about how change works. Every significant transition involves it. The presence of the grief does not mean the direction is wrong. It means you had a life before this one, and leaving it costs something, even when leaving was correct. Acceptance. And this word has been so softened by therapeutic culture that it barely lands anymore. But let it land. Acceptance of this particular truth is one of the more practically useful things a person can do with their psychology. Not acceptance in the passive sense. Acceptance in the sense of, I understand that this is how the system works, and I am not going to spend energy being confused and frightened by a normal response to a normal process. The discomfort of change is not a warning. It is a weather pattern. It has a typical duration. It passes. The new becomes familiar. The unfamiliar accumulates history. The self that exists inside the new structure starts to feel as real as the self that existed inside the old one, and usually more so, if the change was a good one. What you do in the transition period matters enormously. The research on change adaptation consistently finds that people who maintain forward-facing behavior during the discomfort period, who continue acting in accordance with the new direction even while feeling the wrongness, adapt significantly faster than people who wait until they feel ready. Feeling ready is the output of adaptation, not the prerequisite for it. You do not get to feel ready before you start. You feel ready after you've been doing it long enough that it has become familiar. This is probably the thing most people most need to hear and most consistently refuse to believe. The man with the promotion spent 6 weeks feeling like he'd made a mistake before the new floor started feeling like his floor. He almost requested a transfer back during week 3. The feeling was that convincing. The feeling was also, he understood later, completely uninformative about whether he'd made the right call. He had. The floor is his now. He can't quite remember what the old one looked like. Familiarity works in every direction. That's the uncomfortable part, and also the hopeful part. Change doesn't feel like growth. It feels like loss. That's exactly how it's supposed to feel, and it ends. Chapter 10. The compound interest of small habits. A woman decides to change her life. It is January. She has a plan. Specific, ambitious, comprehensive. New exercise routine, new diet, new morning practice, new relationship with her phone, new approach to her work, new commitment to her creative projects that have been waiting in a drawer for 3 years. She has a spreadsheet. The spreadsheet has color coding. By February 14th, she has returned to her previous life almost entirely, with the addition of some guilt and a slightly resentful relationship with the color green. This is not a story about willpower. Willpower is not the variable that failed her. The variable that failed her is a fundamental misunderstanding of how behavioral change actually accumulates. And it's a misunderstanding so widespread that it has become the default template for self-improvement, which is why self-improvement has such a poor track record. The human brain does not change through intensity. It changes through repetition. Specifically, through the repetition of small behaviors frequently enough and consistently enough that they become neurologically automatic, wired into habit loops that operate below the level of conscious decision-making and therefore don't compete for the limited resource of deliberate effort. This is not motivational. It is mechanical, and the mechanics are well understood. Neuroscientist Anne Graybiel's work on habit formation at MIT has traced the neurological process through which repeated behaviors migrate from the prefrontal cortex, the seat of conscious, effortful decision-making, to the basal ganglia, where they operate automatically, efficiently, and without requiring willpower to sustain. This migration is what habit formation actually is, not a change in motivation, a change in which part of the brain is running the behavior. The implication is specific and runs directly counter to how most people approach change. The behaviors most likely to stick are not the most ambitious ones. They are the ones repeated most consistently. A 2-minute daily practice that happens every day for 6 months will produce more durable neurological change than an intensive 2-hour practice that happens enthusiastically for 3 weeks and then collapses under the weight of its own demands. Small and consistent beats, large and intermittent. Every time. The research on this is not ambiguous. James Clear's work on habit architecture, specifically the idea of reducing the friction of desired behaviors and increasing the friction of undesired ones, translates the neuroscience into practical mechanics. You are not fighting your nature when you make a good behavior easier to do. You are working with the actual operating principles of a system that responds to path of least resistance. The behavior that requires less effort will always outcompete the behavior that requires more, given equivalent motivation. So change the effort, not just the motivation. What this means practically is that the question to ask about any habit you want to build is not how do I get myself to want this more, but how do I make this smaller and easier until it happens automatically. The ambition comes later, after the behavior is established, after the neural pathway exists, after the automatic version of the thing is running. You don't start with the version you eventually want. You start with the version you can actually do today. Tired, busy, and not particularly inspired. I have started ambitious practices with great sincerity approximately 11 times in my adult life. I have sustained exactly the ones I made boring enough to be frictionless. The ones that required inspiration to initiate died when the inspiration did, which was always sooner than I expected. The ones that required nothing more than showing up, those are still running. They don't feel like achievements. They feel like brushing my teeth. That is precisely why they work. There is a related principle that doesn't get discussed enough in conversations about habit formation. It's the role of identity, specifically the difference between behavior-based goals and identity-based goals. A behavior-based goal is I want to exercise 3 times a week. An identity-based goal is I am someone who moves their body regularly. These sound like different phrasings of the same thing. They produce meaningfully different behavioral patterns under pressure. When the behavior-based goal hits an obstacle, illness, travel, a week that got away from you, it produces failure. You didn't hit the target. The streak is broken. There is now a gap between where you are and where you were trying to be, and that gap has a gravitational pull towards stopping entirely. When the identity-based goal hits the same obstacle, it produces a missed instance, not a failure of identity. The question becomes not I failed, now what, but what does someone like me do when they miss a week? The answer is usually, they start again, without drama, because their identity was never contingent on the streak. The difference in long-term outcomes between these two orientations is substantial. Not because identity is magic, because the identity-based approach is more resilient to the inevitable interruptions that will occur in any long-term behavioral project. Every significant positive change in a human life is the output of accumulated small decisions. Not the dramatic ones, the undramatic ones, the ones made quietly, repeatedly, in moments when it would have been equally easy to make the other choice. The accumulation is invisible for a long time, which is why most people conclude it isn't working before it has had time to show up. Compound interest in finance is unintuitive because the growth is backloaded. The first years look like nothing. The later years look like everything. Behavioral change follows the same curve. The early repetitions feel like they're producing nothing. They are producing the foundation that the later results will stand on. But you can't see the foundation. You can only see the absence of visible results. And most people interpret the absence of visible results as evidence that the approach isn't working at exactly the moment when the approach is doing its most important work. The woman with the spreadsheet wasn't wrong to want change. She was wrong about the mechanism. She was trying to move fast through a process that only moves through time. She eventually tried again. One thing. Very small. Embarrassingly small. She did it every day for 4 months before she added a second thing. A year later, she had 3 things running automatically. They didn't feel like accomplishments. They felt like Tuesday. That's what success in habit formation feels like. Not triumphant, just normal. Normal is the whole point. You're trying to change what normal means. Chapter 11, You Are Contagious. A team of researchers at the University of California conducted a study on emotional contagion in the workplace. They trained actors to join group meetings and display either mild positive affect or mild negative affect. Not dramatically, just subtly. Slightly more animated or slightly more flat. The kind of mood variation you would not consciously register in a colleague. They measured the emotional state of the group before and after. The results were unambiguous. A single person's subtle emotional state measurably shifted the mood of the entire group within minutes. Not through anything they said. Through tone, posture, micro-expressions, and the neurological mirroring responses of everyone else in the room. You are doing this right now. To everyone around you. Without trying. Without knowing. Without any of them knowing either. The mechanism is mirror neurons, which we touched on earlier. But the phenomenon extends well beyond neural mirroring into something researchers call emotional contagion. The automatic, largely unconscious synchronization of emotional states between people in proximity. It operates through facial expressions that last fractions of a second, through vocal tone and rhythm, through posture and movement. You don't decide to catch someone's anxiety. You just do, the way you catch a cold, through exposure, without consent, at a level below the threshold of awareness. What makes this genuinely interesting and genuinely uncomfortable is the directionality. Most people think about emotional contagion as something that happens to them. Someone in a bad mood affects me. What they think about less, considerably less, is that they are simultaneously the someone in a bad mood affecting someone else. You are always on both ends of this exchange. You are always broadcasting and receiving simultaneously. The question is what channel you're on. Psychologist Elaine Hatfield, whose work on emotional contagion is foundational to the field, distinguishes between conscious and unconscious emotional influence. Conscious influence is deliberate. You choose your words, you modulate your tone, you decide what to express. Unconscious influence is everything else. The micro-expressions, the postural shifts, the quality of attention you bring into a room. The unconscious channel is faster, more pervasive, and significantly harder to manage. It operates before you decide anything. This is why the advice to just be more positive around people is both correct in direction and insufficient in practice. You cannot simply decide to broadcast differently at the conscious level, while the unconscious channel continues transmitting whatever is actually happening in your emotional system. People read the unconscious channel. They may not be able to articulate what they're reading, but they feel it. The performed positivity and the underlying state are both being transmitted, and most people, without knowing they're doing it, give more weight to the one that's harder to fake. The implication is not that you should suppress negative emotions or perform a state you don't have. The implication is that your internal emotional state is not a private matter. It has a radius, and the people inside that radius are being affected by it, whether they know it or not, whether you intend it or not, whether any of you would describe it that way or not. I have walked into rooms carrying something I thought I was managing, some low-grade frustration, some residual anxiety from the morning, and watched conversations shift in ways I later recognized as my contribution. Not because I said anything about it, because the room felt it anyway. The thing I thought I was containing was not contained. It was just unexplained. Nicholas Christakis and James Fowler's research on social network contagion found something that recontextualizes all of this at a larger scale. Emotional states, happiness, depression, loneliness, anxiety, spread through social networks not just between directly connected people, but across multiple degrees of separation. Your mood affects your friend. Your friend's mood affects their colleague. Their colleague's mood affects their partner. The ripple from your emotional state reaches people you will never meet, through chains of contagion you will never be able to trace. This finding is either deeply humbling or deeply motivating, depending on how you hold it. What it makes clear is that the idea of your emotional state as your own private business, affecting only you, managed only by you, relevant only within your own skull, is a fiction. Your emotional state is a public health matter. A small one, but real. What changes when you take this seriously is subtle but significant. You stop thinking about your mood purely in terms of how it affects your experience and start thinking about it in terms of what it's doing in the rooms you move through. Not with guilt. That's the wrong response. And guilt is itself a highly contagious emotional state you probably don't want to be spreading. With something closer to responsibility. A quiet, non-dramatic recognition that how you show up has effects beyond what you can see. There's a practical dimension to this that's worth being specific about. Research on positive emotional contagion, the deliberate cultivation and expression of genuine positive states, finds that it operates through the same mechanisms as negative contagion, but with asymmetric effects. Positive emotional states tend to expand the cognitive and behavioral range of people who catch them. Barbara Fredrickson's broaden and build theory documents how positive emotions, even mildly positive ones, even caught rather than self-generated, widen attention, increase creative problem-solving, and build psychological resources over time. You can make people slightly smarter and more resourceful just by being in a genuinely good mood around them. This is not a metaphor. It is a measured cognitive effect. The reverse is equally true and probably more familiar. Anxiety contracts attention. Frustration narrows problem-solving. Chronic low-level negativity in an environment measurably degrades the cognitive performance of people working in it. You have almost certainly experienced this without having a name for the mechanism. So what do you do with the knowledge that you are contagious? Not perform, not manage, attend. Pay attention to what you're actually carrying into rooms, into conversations, into the ordinary ambient moments of daily life. Not to eliminate the negative. That's neither possible nor desirable. But to make the transmission conscious enough that you're not spreading things you didn't mean to spread, and cultivate the genuine states worth spreading, not as a performance for others. Because the states worth spreading, curiosity, warmth, the particular quality of attention that makes people feel seen, are also the states most worth inhabiting for their own sake. The woman at the food bank from Chapter 7 understood this intuitively, even if she didn't have the neuroscience vocabulary for it. The reason those Saturday mornings felt so clarifying wasn't just the helping. It was the quality of presence she brought to them, and the quality of presence she received back. Two emotional states meeting and amplifying each other in a small room on a Saturday morning. That amplification is available everywhere. Most people just don't know they're the source. You have always been broadcasting. The only question was whether you were doing it on purpose. You are contagious. That has always been true. What you choose to spread is the part that's still up to you. Chapter 12. Sustainability. Why positivity collapses and how to stop that. A man decides, after a particularly difficult year, that he is going to fundamentally change his relationship with his own mind. He reads the books. He downloads the apps. He builds the morning routine. Meditation, journaling, gratitude practice, cold exposure, deliberate movement, all before 8 a.m. He is, for approximately 6 weeks, a genuinely transformed person. Calmer, more present, more capable of finding the good in ordinary moments. Then one Wednesday his alarm doesn't go off, and he misses the window, and the routine doesn't happen, and something subtle shifts. The next morning he does half of it. The morning after that, less. Within 3 weeks, the apps have notifications he's been ignoring for days, and the journal is open to a page dated 3 weeks ago, and he is more or less back to baseline, plus a new layer of self-reproach that wasn't there before. He doesn't understand what happened. Nothing went wrong. He just stopped. What happened is not mysterious. It is, in fact, entirely predictable from the structure of what he built. He constructed a positivity practice the same way people construct diets, as a total system that is either fully operational or failed. There was no partial version. There was no bad day version. There was no version that could survive a Wednesday alarm failure and continue on Thursday without crisis. He built something brittle, and brittle things break. The psychology of sustainable behavior change is well researched and consistently points to the same cluster of factors: flexibility, identity, intrinsic motivation, connection to values rather than outcomes, the absence of all or nothing framing. These are not incidental features. They are the structural properties that determine whether a practice survives contact with real life, which is unpredictable, frequently inconvenient, and completely indifferent to your morning routine. The all-or-nothing trap is probably the most common single point of failure in long-term positivity practice. It operates through a cognitive pattern researchers call the "what the hell" effect. First documented in studies on dieting, but applicable across virtually every domain of behavioral self-regulation. The pattern works like this. You have a standard you've set for yourself. You violate the standard, even slightly, you experience this as failure. And because you've already failed, the psychological cost of failing more completely feels lower than the psychological cost of the original violation. So you stop trying for the day, or the week, or indefinitely. The what the hell effect is why people who eat one cookie eat 12, and why people who miss one meditation session miss 30. The antidote is not stronger willpower. The antidote is building practices that don't have a failure threshold, that exist on a spectrum rather than as a binary, where doing 20% of the thing on a hard day counts as doing the thing, because 20% on a hard day is actually harder and more valuable than 100% on an easy one. Psychologist Kelly McGonigal, whose work on stress and self-regulation is among the more practically useful in the field, makes a distinction between self-compassion and self-indulgence that matters here. Self-compassion, treating a lapse with the same understanding you'd offer a friend, actually produces faster recovery and higher long-term adherence than self-criticism does. Self-indulgence, using the lapse as permission to abandon the practice entirely, produces what you'd expect. The counterintuitive finding is that being harder on yourself after a failure does not improve future performance. It degrades it. The internal pressure that feels like it should be motivating is, neurologically, producing stress responses that impair exactly the executive functions you need to get back on track. Being kind to yourself about the missed Wednesday is not weakness. It is the most efficient path back to Thursday. There's a deeper structural issue worth examining. Many positivity practices fail not because they're poorly designed, but because they're imported, adopted wholesale from someone else's life, someone else's research, someone else's mourning. The practices that sustain over years are almost always the ones that have been customized to the specific textures and rhythms of an individual life. Not the optimal version from the literature, the version that actually fits. A woman I know tried every recommended form of meditation for 4 years with moderate success and significant friction. She eventually discovered that what worked for her was not sitting still, but walking. Slow, deliberate, phone-free walking for 20 minutes in the early evening. The research on walking meditation is solid. The research on doing the thing you'll actually continue doing is even more solid. She is 3 years into a daily practice that she has never once referred to as meditation, even though that is functionally what it is. The label mattered less than the fit. I spent a meaningful period of my life maintaining practices that looked correct from the outside and felt hollow from the inside. The journaling was happening. The words were going on the page. The emotional content was approximately zero. I had found the most efficient path through the motions and was executing it with the spiritual engagement of someone filling out a form. It counted by my metrics. It was producing nothing. The practice had become a performance of practice, and I was the only audience, and I was not convinced. The practices that work over the long term share a common quality that is difficult to manufacture and impossible to fake. They produce something real in you when you do them. Not always euphoria, not always insight, but something. Some genuine shift in state, some actual contact with the present moment, some real movement toward the person you're trying to become. When that quality disappears and the practice becomes purely mechanical, that is information. Not necessarily information to stop. Sometimes practices go through dry periods and recover. But information that something needs to change. Sustainability also requires what might be called an ecology of practice. A set of habits that support each other rather than competing for the same limited resource. Sleep supports every other practice. Exercise supports mood regulation, which supports everything else. Social connection buffers against the isolation that makes self-development feel pointless. When the ecology is healthy, individual practices are easier to sustain. When the ecology is disrupted, when sleep is poor, when isolation increases, when physical health declines, practices that were previously effortless begin to feel impossible. This is why the man's routine collapsed. It was built on top of a life rather than integrated into one. It required conditions the life couldn't reliably provide. The first disruption exposed the gap between the practice and the infrastructure underneath it. Building a sustainable positivity practice is less like constructing a new room in your house, and more like slowly changing the house itself. The foundational stuff, the structural material, the things that determine what's possible in every room. Slow, invisible for a long time. Ultimately more durable than anything built on top of an unchanged foundation, the man eventually rebuilt. Smaller this time, less photogenic. No cold exposure, because it turned out he hated cold exposure and had been doing it entirely because a podcast convinced him he should. Just 3 things that fit his actual life and that he genuinely did not resent doing on hard days. He has been doing them for 2 years. They're not interesting enough to talk about at dinner parties. They're working. Chapter 13. Reflection as a technology. A woman sits in her car in a parking garage after a meeting that did not go well. She is thinking about the meeting. She will continue thinking about the meeting for the rest of the afternoon, through dinner, and intermittently until she falls asleep. By tomorrow morning, she will have replayed the key moment approximately 40 times, each replay generating roughly the same emotional response as the original, and she will be no closer to understanding what actually happened or what to do differently next time. She will call this reflecting on it. It is not reflection, it is rumination. And the difference between them is not semantic. It is neurological, functional, and determines whether the thinking you're doing about your life is moving you forward or keeping you efficiently, exhaustively in place. Rumination is repetitive, passive, and focused on the problem itself, its causes, its implications, its emotional weight. Reflection is active, forward-facing, and focused on meaning and response. What can be understood? What can be learned? What can be done differently? Rumination circles, reflection moves. They can feel identical from the inside, which is why most people don't know which one they're doing and why the distinction matters so much. The research on rumination is extensive and consistently grim. Yale psychologist Susan Nolan Huxema, who spent decades studying the phenomenon, found that ruminative thinking is one of the strongest predictors of depression, anxiety, and impaired problem-solving. Not because it produces insight, but because it doesn't. Rumination generates emotional activation without cognitive progress. It keeps the nervous system in a stress response while providing none of the closure that would allow the stress response to resolve. It is, neurologically speaking, the mental equivalent of pressing the gas with the parking brake on. Reflection, by contrast, activates different neural systems. It engages the prefrontal cortex in ways that allow for perspective-taking, pattern recognition, and the generation of alternative responses. It produces what psychologists call meaning-making, the process through which difficult experiences get integrated into a coherent understanding of yourself and your life, rather than remaining as unprocessed emotional residue. The distinction between the two is not always visible from the content of the thinking. You can think about the same meeting using either process. What differs is the orientation. Rumination asks, why did this happen to me? What does this mean about me? What's wrong with me or them or the situation? Reflection asks, what actually happened here? What can I understand about it? What would I do differently? What does this tell me that I can use? One is a verdict. The other is an inquiry. Journaling is one of the most well-researched tools for shifting from rumination to reflection. Not because writing is inherently therapeutic, but because the act of translating internal experience into language forces a kind of cognitive processing that pure mental replay does not. James Pennebaker's foundational research on expressive writing found that people who wrote about difficult experiences for 15 to 20 minutes over several days showed measurable improvements in immune function, mood, and long-term psychological adjustment compared to control groups. The writing was not polished, it was not structured, it was just translated. The act of putting the experience into words created enough distance to allow genuine processing rather than mere repetition. The key variable in Pennebaker's protocol was that the writing moved toward meaning. Not just narrating what happened, but exploring what it meant, how it connected to other experiences, what it revealed about the writer's values and responses. The narrative arc mattered. Writing that just described events without moving toward understanding produced weaker effects. The brain needs the story to go somewhere, even if the destination is tentative and provisional. I have done both, sometimes in the same sitting. Started writing about something difficult, felt the familiar pull of the ruminative loop, watched the sentences begin to orbit rather than advance. The tell, for me, is repetition. When I notice I've written essentially the same thought 3 different ways and arrived nowhere new, that's rumination dressed in journaling clothes. The move that works is a specific question. What don't I understand about this yet? Not what happened, not how I feel about it. What don't I understand? That question tends to break the loop because rumination already thinks it understands. It's been rehearsing its understanding for hours. Genuine inquiry opens a gap that the loop can't fill. There's a form of reflection that happens in conversation that is underutilized and underappreciated. Not venting. Venting is rumination with an audience, and a sympathetic audience can actually reinforce the ruminative loop by validating it rather than expanding it. But genuine reflective conversation with someone who asks questions that move you toward understanding rather than just confirming how you feel can do things that solitary journaling cannot. The distinction is in what the other person does. A venting companion says, "Yes, that sounds terrible. I can't believe they did that. You must feel awful." A reflective companion says, "That's interesting. What do you think was actually going on for them? What part of this is most confusing to you? What would you want to be different about how you handled it?" The second conversation is sometimes less comfortable than the first. It is also significantly more useful. Timing matters in reflection in ways that are not always obvious. The immediately after period, the hour or two following a difficult experience, is often the worst time for productive reflection, because emotional activation is still high enough to contaminate the thinking. The brain in acute stress has reduced prefrontal function and heightened threat detection. This is not a state optimized for nuanced insight. The woman in the parking garage, sitting in her car an hour after the meeting, is unlikely to reach useful understanding, no matter how long she sits there. What she needs in that window is regulation, something that brings her nervous system out of the stress response, not reflection. The reflection can happen later, when the cortisol has cleared and the prefrontal cortex has come back online. This is counterintuitive because the impulse to process immediately is strong. The experience is fresh, the emotions are vivid. It feels like this is the moment to understand it. But vividness is not clarity. The emotional intensity of the immediate aftermath is not a resource for insight. It's interference. Waiting, even just a few hours, produces meaningfully different and usually more useful reflection. Regular structured review, not just crisis-prompted reflection, but scheduled, routine inquiry into patterns over time, produces something that reactive reflection cannot. Pattern recognition requires distance. You cannot see that the same thing keeps happening to you when you're inside the instance of it happening. You can only see the pattern from a vantage point that includes multiple instances. Weekly or monthly review practices, precisely because they're not triggered by any specific event, create the conditions for that broader view. The woman eventually left the parking garage. She went home, made dinner, regulated enough to sleep. The next morning, she sat with her journal and asked herself what she actually didn't understand about what had happened. The answer was different from what she'd been rehearsing, more complicated, less flattering to her preferred version of events, also actually useful. She had spent the previous evening on the loop. She spent 20 minutes in the morning on inquiry. The 20 minutes produced more than the hours did. Reflection is a technology. Like any technology, it works only when you use it correctly. And most people have been using the wrong tool while calling it by the right name. The parking garage is rumination. The morning after is reflection. The difference is where you end up. Chapter 14. The ordinary moment is the whole thing. A man is on vacation. He has been planning this vacation for 8 months. The destination is beautiful, genuinely, objectively beautiful. The kind of place that appears in travel photography and actually looks like the photographs, which almost never happens. He is standing at the edge of something spectacular. Ocean, maybe, or mountains, or a city at dusk that has no business looking this good. He is taking a photo of it. He will spend approximately 90 seconds looking at this view directly before his phone comes up. The photo will be excellent. He will look at it later, on a plane, and feel something. He will not feel it now. Now he is thinking about the angle, the light, the caption, and whether this is the kind of thing people post immediately or save for a curated moment later. The view is happening. He is not there for it. This is not a story about technology, though technology is part of it. It's a story about a much older problem, the human tendency to live slightly to the side of your own life, to be present at the event while being absent from the experience, to accumulate the evidence of a life without accumulating the life itself. The philosopher Simone Weil wrote that attention is the rarest and purest form of generosity. She was writing about attention toward other people, but the principle extends. Attention toward your own experience, genuine, full-contact attention to what is actually happening as it happens, is something most people are extraordinarily stingy with. Not because they're shallow, because attention is hard, and the alternatives are always easier, and the culture has spent considerable effort making the alternatives easier still. The research on experiential consumption versus material consumption has found, consistently across multiple studies, that experiences produce more lasting well-being than objects, but with a crucial caveat that rarely makes it into the summary. The well-being benefit of experiences depends significantly on how fully they were experienced at the time. A beautiful trip half attended produces less lasting satisfaction than an ordinary afternoon fully inhabited. The quality of presence during the experience is a stronger predictor of remembered happiness than the objective quality of the experience itself. You have almost certainly had this intuition confirmed in your own life. The moments that stay, the ones that remain vivid years later, that you return to when you need to remember that life contains something real, are almost never the occasions you planned carefully and documented thoroughly. They are moments of unexpected contact, when something ordinary suddenly landed, when you were, for some reason, actually there. A friend told me once about sitting in her childhood kitchen with her grandmother. Nothing remarkable was happening. Her grandmother was doing something at the counter, some ordinary kitchen task, and the light was doing something with the window, and my friend was 13 and had nowhere to be, and she was simply there, in the room, in the moment, not performing being there, not aware enough to know she should be performing being there, just present, the way children sometimes are before they learn to be somewhere else. Her grandmother has been gone for 20 years. That afternoon in the kitchen is one of the things my friend returns to. Not a holiday, not a birthday, not an occasion anyone photographed. A Tuesday afternoon in a kitchen with light coming through a window. That's what stayed. The ordinary moment is not a consolation prize for the absence of extraordinary ones. It is the primary material of a life. The extraordinary moments are rare by definition. That's what makes them extraordinary. The ordinary moments are everything else, which is to say, they are almost everything. How you inhabit them is not a minor detail of your life. It is your life's dominant texture, and therefore its dominant quality. Jon Kabat-Zinn, who spent decades translating Buddhist mindfulness practices into clinical applications accessible to secular Western psychology, makes an observation that sounds simple and proves surprisingly hard to actually absorb. This moment, whatever moment you are in right now, will never come again. Not a more perfect version of it. Not this exact configuration of circumstance, sensation, and awareness. This one, once. Then it's memory, which is reconstruction, which is already a different thing. Most people know this abstractly. Very few people know it in their bodies, in the moment, while it's happening. The gap between knowing it and feeling it is the gap that mindfulness practice is specifically designed to close. But mindfulness, in the formal sense, seated meditation, body scans, deliberate practice, is not the only path to this. The simpler version is just slowing down the moments you're already in. Not all of them. That's impossible and would be exhausting. But some of them. The ones that are trying to get through to you, the dinner that's actually good, the conversation that's going somewhere real, the walk that has better light than usual, the morning when, for no particular reason, the coffee is exactly right and the house is quiet, and something about the quality of the air makes you aware briefly that you are alive and that this is happening. Those moments are broadcasting. Most of the time, you're on a different frequency. There's a practical dimension to this worth being concrete about. Psychologist Sonia Lyubomirsky's research on the hedonic adaptation, the process by which positive experiences lose their emotional impact through repetition, found that one of the most effective ways to counteract adaptation is through what she calls savoring. Deliberate, conscious attention to positive experiences as they're occurring, with the specific intention of noticing and appreciating their qualities, rather than moving through them toward the next thing. Savoring is not complicated. It's pausing. noticing that something good is happening and staying with it long enough for it to actually register, for the neurological encoding to take place, for the experience to become the kind of memory that remains available rather than the kind that evaporates. The enemy of savoring is anticipation of the next thing. And we live in a culture so thoroughly structured around the next thing, the next notification, the next task, the next phase, the next goal, that arriving fully in the current thing requires a small act of resistance, not a dramatic one, just the decision, repeated, to let this one finish before moving to the one after it. The man at the View eventually put his phone in his pocket. Not because anyone told him to, because something about the light at that particular moment felt like it required him to be a person rather than a photographer. He stood there for 4 minutes. He has no record of it. He remembers it clearly. The photo from before is good. He has looked at it twice since coming home. The 4 minutes without the phone he has returned to several times. Not the image of the view, the feeling of being there, the specific quality of standing somewhere beautiful and actually receiving it. That's what presence makes possible. Not extraordinary experiences, ordinary ones, fully inhabited, which turns out to be extraordinary enough. The ordinary moment is not the gap between the important moments. It is the whole thing. Chapter 15. The Architecture of Belonging. A woman moves to a new city at 34. She is competent, personable, genuinely interesting to talk to. She has no difficulty meeting people. She meets quite a few of them. Colleagues, neighbors, the people you accumulate through the ordinary friction of a new life in a new place. After 18 months, she has a full calendar and a pervasive, low-grade loneliness that she cannot entirely explain because by any external measure, she is not alone. She has contacts. She does not have community. The difference between those two things is not obvious until you're on the wrong side of it. And in contemporary Western life, an increasing number of people are on the wrong side of it, without knowing exactly how they got there or what to call the gap. Loneliness researchers, and there are more of them now than there used to be, because the phenomenon has become significant enough to require them, make a distinction that most people's intuitions don't naturally reach. Social isolation is an objective condition. You have few or no social contacts. Loneliness is a subjective condition. You feel disconnected regardless of how many contacts you have. The two correlate but are not the same thing. You can be surrounded by people and profoundly lonely. You can have very limited social contact and feel genuinely connected. The variable that determines which experience you're having is not quantity. It is quality, specifically, the quality of felt understanding. Whether the people around you actually know you. Whether you actually know them. John Cacioppo, whose decades of research on loneliness produced some of the most important findings in social neuroscience before his death in 2018, described loneliness as perceived social isolation. The gap between the social connection you have and the social connection you need. His findings on what loneliness does to the human body are worth sitting with. Chronic loneliness increases cortisol levels, disrupts sleep architecture, impairs immune function, accelerates cognitive decline, and increases mortality risk at rates comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. This is not a metaphor for feeling bad. This is a physiological cascade triggered by a perceived deficit in belonging. Your body treats loneliness as a threat, because evolutionarily, it was one. A human separated from their group in the ancestral environment was a human in danger. The alarm system that evolved to motivate reconnection is the same system that produces the physical and cognitive symptoms of chronic loneliness. It was designed to be temporary, discomfort sufficient to drive you back toward connection. In an environment where genuine connection is difficult to find or maintain, the alarm runs chronically. And chronic alarm is not a motivator. It's a drain. The social landscape most people inhabit now is structurally misaligned with what the human connection system actually needs. We have more ways to communicate than any previous generation and, in many measurable ways, less genuine connection. The reasons are multiple and well documented. Geographic mobility that separates people from established networks, the replacement of third places with digital spaces, the time demands of contemporary professional life, the gradual privatization of daily existence into individual households and individual screens. What gets lost in these structural shifts is something specific. Not contact. We have plenty of contact. What gets lost is what sociologists call weak ties, the casual, repeated, low-stakes interactions with people who are not close friends, but who constitute the texture of a life embedded in a community. The neighbor you see on the way to work, the person at the coffee shop who knows your order, the regular at the gym whose name you know and whose presence you'd notice if it disappeared. These interactions feel trivial. Research suggests they are anything but. Gillian Sandstrom and Elizabeth Dunn's research on minimal social interactions found that people consistently underestimate the well-being benefit of brief, casual exchanges with acquaintances and strangers. Participants who had more of these interactions reported higher positive affect and stronger sense of belonging. Not because the conversations were deep, but because they provided repeated, low-intensity experiences of being recognized, of existing briefly in someone else's awareness. Being seen by strangers, it turns out, is not nothing. It is part of the infrastructure of feeling real. The deeper connections, the ones that require vulnerability, sustained attention, genuine knowledge of another person over time, are irreplaceable and increasingly rare. Not because people don't want them, because they require something that contemporary life has systematically devalued. Time spent without an agenda, in proximity, repeatedly, over long enough periods that genuine familiarity can accumulate. Most deep friendships were not built. They accreted. Through proximity, shared classes, shared workplaces, shared neighborhoods, that created repeated contact without requiring anyone to schedule intimacy. When the proximity ends, as it does when people graduate or move or change jobs, the friendship often doesn't survive in the same form. Not because the care disappears, but because the infrastructure that was doing the quiet work of maintenance disappears. And rebuilding that infrastructure in adulthood, without the natural forcing functions of shared circumstance, requires deliberate effort that most people find slightly awkward and occasionally humiliating. Asking someone if they want to be your friend at 34 feels ridiculous in a way it didn't at 8. The stakes feel higher. The risk of rejection feels more significant. The vulnerability required to say, directly, without the cover of circumstance, "I would like to know you better," is uncomfortable enough that most people don't do it, and instead wait for connection to happen to them the way it happened in childhood, through proximity and repetition and the accident of being in the same place. The accident rarely comes. I have been bad at this in specific and recognizable ways. I have let friendships that mattered thin out through pure neglect, not intentional neglect. The kind where you mean to reach out and don't. And then enough time passes that reaching out requires acknowledging the passage of time, which feels like an implicit apology. which adds friction, which makes reaching out less likely. The friendship becomes a thing I feel guilty about rather than a thing I participate in. The guilt makes contact less likely. The reduced contact produces more guilt. A very efficient system for losing people I didn't mean to lose. The research on what sustains close relationships over time is surprisingly specific. It is not grand gestures. It is not the quality of the time spent together, though quality matters. It is frequency of contact. The simple fact of showing up repeatedly without the contact needing to be significant. A text that requires no response. A forwarded article with a one-line note. 15 minutes of conversation that doesn't go anywhere in particular. These micro-deposits of attention are what keep the account open. Their absence, over enough time, quietly closes it. Community. The larger thing, the sense of belonging to something beyond your immediate personal relationships, requires a different kind of investment. It requires participation in something shared. Not a common interest in the abstract sense, but a common activity in the concrete sense. The book club, the running group, the volunteer shift, the neighborhood organization. Something that puts you in the same physical space as the same people repeatedly, doing something alongside them rather than just talking about doing something. The alongside is the variable. Shared activity creates a quality of connection that conversation alone doesn't, what psychologists call parallel presence. The particular ease of people who have worked or moved or made something together. It bypasses some of the social friction of direct intimacy. You come to know people through their behavior, not just their self-presentation. That knowledge is slower and less dramatic than the kind that comes through confessional conversation, and it tends to be more durable. The woman who moved to the new city eventually joined a community garden. Not because she particularly wanted to grow vegetables, because someone she'd met twice told her it was the place where you saw the same people every week and somehow ended up knowing them. She went. She grew things she didn't eat. She knew the same people every week. After a year, she had 2 friendships that surprised her with their depth. Built almost entirely through the accumulated time of being in the same outdoor space, doing something with their hands, not trying too hard. She is still lonely sometimes. The loneliness is different now. It's the ordinary kind. The kind that passes, that moves through you rather than settling in. The kind that tells you you're human rather than telling you something is wrong with you. Belonging is not a feeling you find. It is a structure you build, slowly, through repeated presence in shared spaces with people who are also, most of them, hoping someone will stay long enough to know them. Most people are waiting to feel ready to build it. The building is what makes you ready. You started this book with a brain that was already running. It didn't pause while you listened. It kept doing what it always does. Scanning, filtering, confirming, rehearsing, broadcasting, absorbing, circling, occasionally reflecting. The same machinery, the same defaults. What's different now is that you have names for some of the machinery. That matters more than it sounds. A process you can name is a process you can watch. A process you can watch is a process you can, with enough repetition and enough patience, begin to redirect, not eliminate, not override through force of will. Redirect, the way you'd redirect a river, not by stopping it, but by changing the shape of the banks it runs through. The confirmation machine is still running. So is the negativity bias. The stories are still there, the old ones, the ones written by someone younger and working with less information. The people around you are still doing things to your brain. Your imagination is still rehearsing something. and it may not be running the right scenarios yet. None of that is fixed. None of it was supposed to be fixed by reading a book. What changes is the relationship, not the machinery, the relationship to the machinery. The slight, crucial distance between you and your automatic processes that makes it possible to see them clearly enough to do something other than what they've always produced. That distance is built from attention. Small, repeated, undramatic acts of noticing. Noticing when the confirmation machine is auditing for a verdict it's already reached. Noticing when the negativity bias is weighting a bad day heavier than the week around it deserves. Noticing when the story you're living is a third draft written under duress by someone who didn't have all the facts. The noticing isn't comfortable. Seeing the machinery clearly is not the same as liking what you see. There will be moments, guaranteed, recurring moments, where what you notice is that you've been doing the thing you thought you'd stopped doing. The loop you thought you'd exited. The rehearsal you thought you'd retired. The old story running again, quietly in the background, filing its evidence. That moment is not failure. That moment is the practice. The return, the moment you notice and come back, is where the actual change lives, not in the pristine execution of a new habit. In the 10,000th return after the 10,000th drift. In the willingness to keep redirecting a system that was never designed to stay redirected. This is not inspiring in the way books about positivity are usually inspiring. It doesn't end with transformation. It ends with a practice. Ongoing, imperfect, occasionally tedious, and entirely worth doing. Your brain is not broken. It has been taking very detailed notes on the wrong things. You know that now. You can start giving it better material. The notes it takes from here are at least partly up to you.